Bachim Aleph, chapter 6. We're on Pasuk Aleph, verse 11. B'chavod, either one of you is interested in reading, go right ahead.
So the word of Hashem then came to Shlomo, saying, "This temple that you build, you should follow my decree, to follow my statutes, and observe all my commandments, to follow them. I should uphold my word with you.
No word.
I shall uphold my word with you that I spoke to David your father. I shall dwell among the children of Israel, and I shall not forsake my people Israel."
Right, which in and of itself is a shiur. If you think about this, Beit HaMikdash was built for what purpose? Whereas if you had to restate the purpose of the construction of Beit HaMikdash, the purpose was what?
Well, I would say honor Hashem and atone for our sins, because the whole point is to have kavanah.
Right. So to, on a more abstract level, what you're saying is effectively the same. It's to facilitate the saturation of this world with godliness, with spirituality. How's that achieved? It's achieved in the positive by us being able to fulfill commandments that we can't fulfill outside of Beit HaMikdash. So there are things that we can do when we have a Beit HaMikdash. We can offer korbanot, we can burn incense, we can offer menachot, we have the flower offerings, we have wine libations. So there are certain things that we can't do. We did in the Mishkan, but that are done on a larger, more permanent, more glorious, more respectable scale inside Beit HaMikdash. And at the same time, Beit HaMikdash has the capacity to achieve atonement, which is how we maintain the relationship with God. It's not just you build something glorious and fanciful and then you do whatever you want outside. It's that any mistakes that you make pertaining to Beit HaMikdash or pertaining to your relationship with Hashem, it can all be atoned through this vehicle. And here Hashem is telling Shlomo, this is not a permanent relationship. In other words, you need to observe the mitzvot, you need to be careful about all the chukim, mishpatim, etc., in order that this house should continue to exist. I spoke about this once, a very fascinating discussion that Rav Sabato had with us once, around Tisha B'Av, where the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, if you think about it, was counterproductive. In fact, we have a Gemara that says so, in one way or another. Masechet Sukkah, the Gemara says that there are three things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created and that He regrets, as if to say they had a purpose, but their purpose was so badly missed that that their creation comes into question. One of them is Ishmaelim. I won't comment on that now. But another one, there are psukim that prove all of this. The Kasdim is the third one. And the first one was the Galut. Why would Hashem regret the Galut? What's to regret about the Galut? It says explicitly in, Kitavo, in Ha'azinu. It's mentioned in Devarim. It's mentioned in Bechukotai. How many times the Torah tells us that if we do the wrong thing, we're going to be exiled, we're going to be scattered, we're going to be dispersed, etc. So what's the purpose of the Galut? The purpose of the Galut is to...
It's really to knowing that we will have Galut should prevent us from doing the wrong thing.
So you're saying kind of like capital punishment. It's more of a preventive measure than anything else. It's a threat.
Yeah.
It's a threat. Hashem threatens us with Galut. It's going to be really bad, so you are best off avoiding this. And then ultimately, that's what happens. So when the threat actually comes true, there's a famous Gemara, Masechet Gittin, where a man says to his wife, if you go one more time to Eretz Yisrael, Ali al-Raged, who was fighting with her about traveling, like if you go one more time, this get that I'm giving you is valid from now. And so he did it, and she went. And then they had to go ask the question. I believe it was Rav Ashi. They asked him the question, is the get actually valid? Means this woman actually divorced? So what was the condition? The condition was if she goes and travels without permission, and she went ahead and she did it, even though it was a mitzvah. So not a mitzvah, midorat, fine, but a mitzvah. So the question that he asked over the neder was, I'm sorry, it was a neder, it wasn't a get. The question he asked over the neder was, when you said this, did you actually mean to enforce it? Or did you say it as a threat? So I said, I didn't mean that if she does it, I'm going to divorce her because I'm tired of her. It means, don't do it and the way that I said don't do it was dressed up in this threat that we were going to get divorced. So he said, if when you told her this, you knew she was going to do it again, would you have said it meaning that you were going to get divorced? He said, no. She said, okay, so the neder is opened by a harata. It's been undone because you never had this action in mind when you made the neder. It's like it wasn't even a real neder, it was more of a threat. So you couldn't make the case. The only problem is that it happened. It's like Kadosh Baruch Hu said, not just once, twice. We were exiled from Eretz Yisrael. But what's the point? If our atonement comes to us from Beit HaMikdash, if the only way that we can repair the damage that was done to the relationship between us and Hashem is by bringing korbanot inside Beit HaMikdash, why destroy it? Why take away your opportunity, our only opportunity, to offer korbanot and to achieve some kind of atonement, some kind of forgiveness? We are about to put it very, very poetically and very abstractly, was that that's only true when atonement is what you're really looking for. In other words, if my goal in coming to Beit HaMikdash and bringing a korban is to achieve forgiveness, i.e. I did something wrong, mea culpa, I won't do it again, I promise. In fact, I'm bringing a korban that won't do anything again. And that's what should have happened to me, but I'm going to substitute this animal for my life and take my life more seriously. Fine, naniach. If that was the case, it wouldn't have happened. That type of relationship and that mechanism for achieving teshuvah and coming closer to Hashem was perfectly necessary. It's when you bringing the korban was what made you feel a little bit better about the stupid things that you did yesterday, the day before, last week, etc. And that korban is really only a bookmark between episodes of idiotic behavior, where the korban itself is the problem. In other words, your relationship with Hashem is a problem. Beit HaMikdash can't solve it because the relationship is so perverse. You think you have a relationship when you can say, you ever seen how little kids, when they teach them in pre-K or in nursery, they teach them about saying I'm sorry. So they walk around smacking each other and saying I'm sorry, smacking each other, taking things, stealing them. It's like I'm sorry. Really, all it means is that anything that I did gets automatically erased, which is a phenomenal concept, because that means I can do whatever I want. I say I'm sorry, and it's okay. So I can steal, I can bite, I can scratch, I can hit. I don't have to share. All I have to do is say I'm sorry afterwards, and it's done. If you understand what apology really means, and if you understand what it really means to achieve atonement and forgiveness, you wouldn't have to ask I'm sorry more than once in a while. Happens sometimes you repeat the same avirah, but at least if your intention when you apologized the first time was genuine, it shouldn't happen all that often. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Shlomo is not, I'll forgive your avirot as long as they don't pass a certain level, or once the nation starts to fall apart, I'm taking away their ability to apologize. It's that it's been prophesied ahead of time, it's been foreseen that Beit HaMikdash has a good and a bad application. The good application is that we should make use of it as minimally as necessary. I've said this before 1,000 times on a bunch of different topics. The purpose of a good Rav is to make himself as minimally necessary as possible, where he answers the difficult questions, but you you teach people, you educate people to the point they become at least somewhat halachically proficient, and hopefully philosophically as well. The purpose of good parenting is no different. You raise your children to become independent of you. If they depend on you for the rest of their lives, you haven't done your job. The same is true of Beit HaMikdash. It's necessary, it's true that we're human, it's almost inevitable that we should do avirot, but the goal is to do less and less over time. And so the role that it plays is not every time we go off the beaten path, this is what brings us back. It's that it only helps when you care about the nature of the relationship itself. When all you're doing is sinning and bringing sacrifices, then you bring sacrifices, you've missed the point. In fact, Beit HaMikdash is blinding you to this reality because you are convinced that every time you bring a korban, you've been forgiven, everything is okay, when in reality, it's only getting worse and worse and you're getting further and further away. So that on the topic of Hashem telling Shlomo before the house was even completed that it's very likely that if we don't observe the Torah and the mitzvot, galut is not just a threat, it's actually a reality. But in that perspective, the galut, where you are distant not only from Beit HaMikdash, you're distant from Eretz Yisrael, distant from your language, you're distant from your identity, from your culture, you're amongst anti-Semitic people, you have to fight in order to reconstruct your desire to worship Hashem in every way possible, and then it becomes possible when you're willing to fight for Eretz Yisrael as well. I didn't say inherit Eretz Yisrael, I said to fight for it, because that's a struggle too. You got a question, David?
So do you think that it would have been almost, so if we link the destruction to the Dash to the Averot, can you say that since people commit Averot, the destruction of the Dash was kind of inevitable in a way, or can you argue that is the degree of the Averot that made it inevitable?
That's a Rebbe used to love these questions.
Is it as if I don't have an if question?
It's an well, right. It's deeper than that. It's are averot in fact inevitable, right? Remember, on the one extreme we have negotiating with the Satan. Rabbi, is it better to eat in a non-kosher restaurant with a kippah or without a kippah? So you're waiting. You want to hear the rabbi say it's okay to go around a kosher restaurant without a kippah.
I'll tell you the version of the Italian for that.
When we're offline.
Yeah.
Right. So the entire Italian language is one big deleted expletive in the in
Exactly.
recordings. So what you're saying is basically. So Adam HaRishon, this is Rav Rebbe's response would be this way. So you're telling me avarot are inevitable. So Adam HaRishon, it was inevitable because it's impossible for a human being to be perfect in Olam Hazeh. So once he actually takes material, physical form, it's inevitable that he should do an avirah, right? It's just a matter of time. He had two mitzvot, one positive, one negative, and it's like you knew something was going to give, right? So if it's inevitable, why does he get punished? This isn't Paro, and it had to happen, didn't have to be him, the extent to which this is Adam, between Adam and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Was it inevitable that he should say? If it's inevitable, as it is, we like to say, we enjoy saying that it's inevitable that people should commit averot. So if it's really inevitable, why the punishment? If it's inevitable, it's unjust, it's unfair to punish him for this. At the same time, you open the door when you tell him, don't do this, as if to say, I acknowledge the reality that you can do it, and maybe you're even tempted to do it. Nonetheless, I expect you not to. So this is one of those spiritual, psychological conundra that doesn't have an answer. By its very definition, it's undefined. There's no way that I could answer such a question. Did HaKadosh Baruch Hu expect Adam to be perfect in every single way? Did he realize that by creating the potential or the temptation for Avirah, that it was ultimately going to happen? Did it have to happen then? Did it have to happen at that degree of intensity? Might it have been worse if it had been delayed? Was it, according to the Arizal, there's a fascinating discussion about maybe he prevented worse damage by doing it then and not later. It gets very, very dicey when you get down to the bottom line. And as I've told you before, the Zohar Kadosh has a very explicit discussion about this, where Rabbi Shimon Baruch Chai, before he passes away, he encounters the Neshama of Adam HaRishon, who tells him, do me a favor, don't talk about what happened in Gan Eden. They're not going to understand you. They're not going to understand me. In other words, they're going to think it was a silly little thing, and really it was much deper than that. So he says, no, I already mentioned a little bit about them. He says, okay, whatever it is that you told them, and that's it. Don't talk about it anymore, because people won't get it. If you say averot are inevitable, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes because he enjoys it. Or you're saying that the punishment is an inevitable course of action. In other words, it's inevitable that we should sin, it's inevitable that we should get punished, and that becomes the chatchila, it becomes the ideal. You understand the danger of saying that is what you're prescribing averot to people. You're telling people, if I tell you it's inevitable you should do something wrong, and I'm going to punish you anyway, then I'm punishing you for the inevitable. And even if I'm punishing you for the right reasons, what I'm basically telling you is there's no way you can succeed otherwise. Like you can't possibly have done differently. And then we run into that danger of justifying post facto every failure there has ever been. So if an Arab blows up a bus, that means that he's a prophet because God wanted all those people to die at that precise second, and so he is just an agent of God. But then everyone who does anything is an agent of God, doing what God wants at that particular time. So the Rambam has a long discussion about this Moreh Nevuchim. It's not because really that's the defeatist attitude. Everything that happens by a perfectly divinely ordained reason, cause, desire, and therefore everything is perfect. But I can choose to go left or right. Whatever I choose is automatically what God wants. So free will versus determinism. And so the conundrum can't be answered. This is why Rav Rebbe would tell you this is the very nature of the obligation to study the Torah. Because you have to study both sides, because the question has no answer, because the more you study, the more you understand. Even though you won't arrive at a conclusive answer. You need to learn both sides. You need to learn to judge Adam HaRishon favorably. You need to understand what's the nature of punishment, what's the nature of temptation, and how does this relate to me. The obligation to study is basically, you should constantly struggle with this question. So Hashem is telling Shlomo, you just built a Beit HaMikdash. You built it in order to glorify my name, in order to sanctify, the world with divinity. Although, ironically, Beit HaMikdash is the place in which you can receive atonement and forgiveness, etc. At the same time, if you ignore my mitzvot, there will come a point at which Beit HaMikdash can help you. And so, even though you haven't even inaugurated it, I'm telling you, I'm going to wreck it. Not easy, but it's within this context that the whole idea about Shlomo marrying the daughters of the kings of the different empires of the world and trying to obviate the need for the galut. That's exactly the nature of the discussion. If it's inevitable, if the galut is inevitable, if the avarot are inevitable, if the galut is inevitable, then why don't we squash it now? Why don't we address it? Why don't we try to achieve the same effects differently? He was trying to manipulate the spiritual nature of the world. Right. But it's a fascinating question at any rate. It's the same, there is no answer. The psukim are very dense, they're very terse. The Kabbalistic literature is very, very rich in this discussion, but it never comes down conclusively on one side or the other. Just know that.
But if you think about it in terms of Mashiach, at a certain point something has to turn, right? So if you believe that the third temple would be permanent and it's related to the
so let me disabuse you of the notion,
right,
and introduce you to a fascinating machloket about the nature of the Mashiach. Did you see recently there was an article on somebody posted on Facebook, a very brilliant woman wrote something in the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel. No, she is a brilliant woman, but no. About Mashiach is not your cleaning lady.
Yes, I read this one.
Right.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I think Lee Fogel posted it. So basically, this woman was saying, in the days building up to the Tisha B'Av, everyone has this impression that Mashiach is going to come and fix everything. And she said, but why don't we fix it now? What gives us this impression that Mashiach is going to fix all of our imperfections? So it was interesting. I didn't have the time on Facebook to get into it, but is the Mashiach the one who puts the jewel on the crown, like the icing on the cake? He's the one that just finishes this national process of teshuvah, or is the Mashiach the one who helps save us from a place that we can't save ourselves from?
But isn't there like two
because options? There you go. So the Gemara gives you two, and it's
like if we're too bad.
It seems almost like the Gemara wants to rule in favor of.
If we're better, we're going to have the Mashiach maybe earlier.
And here, so this dichotomy exists throughout the whole concept of redemption. Is the Mashiach the solution to a problem, or is he the result of an effort on our part to end this constant struggle with evil? So. Is the Mashiach preceded by a movement of national, maybe international teshuvah? Or is he preceded by such cataclysmic debauchery that the only way out is supernatural assistance, supernatural intervention? There's no way you could pull yourself out of that hole. So look what happened in Mitzrayim. You have both, because this is one of those, again, spiritual mishmatic conundrum.
People amazingly going back.
That's another issue. This is all from Masechet Sanhedrin, the 11th chapter, talks about Mashiach and redemption. So we have an opinion. So can we be redeemed when can we only be redeemed if we do teshuvah, or will redemption come anyway? Machloket. It is a machloket. So maybe we have to repent in order to merit a redemption. Maybe the redemption comes to save us from a situation, from an incorrigible, hopeless, desperate situation. As if to say Mashiach is almost b'di'avad, like it'd be better that we reconstruct the Beit HaMikdash on our own without having the need for like a major intervention. And the Gemara talks about whether the redemption has to come with terrible suffering or if it can be obviated. The Vilna Gaon very famously said already in his time, this is before the end of the 19th century, in the 18th century, he passed away in 1799, he himself said the time for a merciful redemption is long past. Like if it's going to happen, it's not going to be pleasant. Obviously it's going to happen, but not in a pleasant way. So he was already leaning in one direction. So do we need to do certain things in order to enable the Mashiach to come onto the scene and then he completes what we've begun? Or is the Mashiach going to fix it anyway? Regardless of what we do and how we do it, does this depend on like it's just a function of time? Or at least there's a hard stop. Up to a certain point, we can bring the redemption more mercifully. Beyond a certain point, it just has to happen. It just has to happen. Look at Mitzrayim, and we go back to the question of free will and inevitability. Inevitable or not that we go down into Egypt, how were we redeemed? We were saved from the 49th gate of hell. I mean, basically, had we stayed there longer, we say this every year in Haggadah, if we had stayed there any longer, we never would have left. So our leaving Egypt, it was ideal or unideal? I mean, it was ideal. Eventually it had to happen. The nation had to happen. The Torah had to happen. But did it happen under less than ideal circumstances? And is that some kind of an indication of where things are going? Chazal compare this past redemption to the future redemption. In fact, the reason the Gemara tells us that all the holidays that refer back to Egypt are going to be cancelled on the calendar, the three regalim will no longer exist at some point in the future. Clearly, we pray that we should bring the Qurban Pesach, so at some point later in the future that might come about. But what's the what's the point? The point is that, as the Navi says, the coming Geulah is going to be so great, no one's going to, like, Egypt won't even be worth comparing it to. And again, it'll be so great because we waited so long and we've accomplished so much, and here's what we deserve on a silver platter. Or it's going to get so bad and it's going to get so desperate that no one's going to understand how redemption is possible, and it's going to happen by absolute surprise, by a total miracle. The Gemara leaves the door open. You have two interpretations, you have two possibilities, you have perfectly legitimate opinions on either side. It's just not so simple.
So it pretty much depends on us.
So it does. So there's a certain degree of spirituality that's necessary for Beit HaMikdash to exist, and even once it exists, it depends on your attitude towards it. We learned this in Mishlei. We were a while back, a few years ago. Make your legs precious, like rare, in the house of your friend, lest he should become satiated with you and come to hate you. That's the pasuk right before Devash Matzata Echol Dayeka Pendisbe'u V'Hakeoto. You found honey, eat what's enough, lest you should become oversatiated with it and vomit it. So the Midrash says very explicitly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Beit HaMikdash, and He doesn't want to see you outside the regalim. Because if He does, that means you made a mistake. It happened once, it happened twice. Every week you're going to bring the Qurban. So that's just animal genocide. Very good. So let's continue just a little bit. We're on the at this point in the English it's already on page 815 at the top.
Shlomo had built the temple and finished it. He built the walls of the temple on the inside with cedar boards. From the temple floor to the ceiling beams, he overlaid it with wood on the inside. He also overlaid the temple floor with cypress boards. He built fan overlay for the 20 cubits at the rear of the temple of cedar boards, from the floor to the beams, and he prepared this area inside the partition to be the Holy of Holies. The temple was 40 cubits long, that is the sanctuary at the front. The cedar upon the temple on the inside was decorated with a network of designs and of knobs and blossoming flowers. Everything was covered with cedar wood stone was not visible. One question: how do you know the place of the Kodesh?
How did Shlomo know?
Yeah.
There are a lot of midrashim that describe Ibn Ashitiyah is.
So it's supposed to be still there right now.
So this is what the Arabs refer to as Al-Aqsa.
Yeah, they call it the Dome of the Rock.
Right. Al-Aqsa is the edge, like Qatseh, the end. So the Dome of the Rock. So if tradition holds true, this is where the Aqidah took place. This is where Yaakov had his Bet El, this prophetic vision.
How is that rock so much recognizable from any other rock that would have been all across?
Probably it's buried under quite a bit of sediment, but it's more a function of location. In other words, if we do have a tradition on where the location of this is, and we seem to be pretty confident about Beit HaMikdash being where the Temple Mount currently stands, then Ibn Ashitiyah would be right under Kodesh HaKodashim, would be the foundation under it. How precisely the Arabs kept that tradition is a good question. To the extent that you had Jews coming and going, even during the Muslim occupation, that's really what it is, right? The Ottoman Empire. We seem, if the tunnels that dug under the Haramain, they'll tell you at a certain point that you're passing where we believe Ibn Ashitiyah to be, right? Where we actually believe this is where things are located. It's a pretty frightening thing when you think about it, but I think there is a bit of consensus in terms of Har HaBayit, where exactly Kodesh HaKodashim is supposed to be.
How did Shlomo find out where it was? From the time of the Akedah until the time of Betel, until the time of Shlomo. There is no. Is there a tradition that explains how he found that?
Good question. I don't know. I don't remember that I've ever come across a source that explains how he knew. I think it could be that the locals themselves had a tradition about certain places. There's a certain hill in not far from Mizperichon. The Bedouins refer to as Nabi Musa, like Moshe the Prophet, like the hill of Moshe the Prophet. Okay, they have some sort of tradition. There's another one they have about Eliyahu Nabi in the north. They claim that he did something on a particular mountain. So you have a little bit, to a greater or lesser extent, certain degree of certainty. But as far as Har HaBayit is concerned, we're pretty confident that's where it is. It's a bunch of there are lots of historical accounts of people who traveled through and saw it. And from the time Beit HaMikdash was destroyed by the Romans until the empire collapsed and the Arabs took over, they haven't really gone anywhere. It hasn't been the Crusades. I mean, still people were very much infatuated with Yerushalayim and with reaching the Temple Mount. So probably there is a degree of consensus over it. That's what I would suggest. Yeah. Let's do one more paragraph and then we'll take a quick break.
He prepared an inner sanctum and the temple towards the inside. There is placed
to place
the Ark of the Covenant of Hashem. Behind the partition was an area 20 cubits in length and 20 cubits in width.
Okay, so 10 meters by 10 meters, not huge.
And 20 cubits in height. He overlaid the partition with fine gold. He also overlaid an altar with cedar wood. Shlomo then overlaid the intersection of the temple with fine gold, and he drew golden chains in front of the partition, and he overlaid it with gold. He then overlaid the whole temple with gold until the entire temple was completely overlaid. The whole altar that stood opposite the entrance of the inner sanctum, he overlaid with gold.
Mizbach HaZahav. So we have several Mizbachot in the Beit HaMikdash. Mizbach HaZahav was already in the Kodesh. Mizbach HaNachoshet is referred to as the copper. The innermost one, yeah. That's what the purposes that it serves. So we are not generally allowed as Israelim to go in there. So we only have access. Yes, that's right. We're not outside the Azara. So the Levim can stand. So the right Kodesh HaKodashim, he takes a shovelful of ketoret from the Mizbeach, from Mizbeach HaZahav, and he puts it inside Kodesh HaKodashim. That he does once a year. The ketoret itself he does twice a day. Yeah, but taking a small, it's not even that big. It's a small shovel. He takes it in, and he takes it out.
They made replicas already in the temple. They're ready.
Fascinating stuff. If you've been there and you've seen
I've
it,
been. It's impressive.
yeah. Have you ever been there? No.
You have
Next
to
time you
go
go, yeah. No offense to Tel Aviv, but the next time you get to Israel, go to the Temple Institute in the old city. They've made. For the most part, it's miniatures. I think.
They made real things.
Now they made the.
They actually made a Mizbeach, but it's going to be ready
Really?
to be. It's on wheels. They're going to be able to roll it to Bet HaMikdash
Sweet.
as soon as they get it. The middle eyes is real size as well.
Really?
The clothing of the Kohanim, the Kohanim.
Yeah. So it's impressive. It's an impressive sight to see all these things that we talk about, read about in the parasha, to see them going true. So again, this is the point that we made, I believe, 2 weeks ago. It's not for a shortage of gold that Shlomo Melech didn't include the wood. There is, I believe, a Kabbalistic point about this, how the wood itself is a living organism to an extent, represents the neshama inside, a valuable utensil, a valuable vessel. So the gold itself is a facade, but the heart of Beit HaMikdash is something living, not just an inanimate metal. It's that the wood itself represents growth, represents strength, a certain degree of flexibility, but rigidity, a lot of things that we associate with tzaddikim, with the neshama, etc. So the neshama of the mizbeach, so to speak, the neshama of the walls throughout the entire Beit HaMikdash was effectively wood coated by gold, and for him to coat the entire thing probably wouldn't have cost that much more to just make the whole thing out of gold to begin with, but that obviously wasn't the point. So I'm going to put a bookmark here, and with God's help we will pick it up from here next week. A couple of quick minutes.